people that work for you, whether it's sales, whether it's in the field as a technician, whether it's on the marketing side. So the question is, how do we develop not only that individual to be a high performer, but to collaborate with the rest of their department and then with the rest of the organization or the company? And so these are the big questions that most companies face today. And hopefully I can give you 10% of an answer of how you can replicate that within your own business. So the first thing that we touch on is the first thing you have to do to a team is to motivate them, right? And we can all agree with that. But the issue with motivation is we don't truly understand it. It's not what we think it is. When we talk about motivation, I can't just dump a bunch of motivation water on you and it works. We have to use the right type of motivation for the right individual, the right group, in order to get that change that we want. And this is where some of the behavioral science that we'll talk about will come in. But what's important to understand is more isn't always better. And I think within the pest industry itself, you use the wrong chemical, you keep dumping it, what happens? Probably not the intended effect you want. So it's ensuring that you're using the correct amount of motivation, the correct leverage to get that motivation, as well as to ensure that motivation isn't a short-term gain. And we'll get into a little bit of what that means here in a minute. And so one thing that I look at is Hell Week. So within SEAL training, on day 15 of training, you go through what's called Hell Week. Again, you'll get a lot more story of that tomorrow, but basically the very short rundown is 5.5 days, 4 hours of sleep. Now we would think that most SEAL candidates are extremely motivated to do the job, right? Yet somehow we have an 85+% attrition rate. In fact, in my class, I started with well over 200 people, and I finished Hell Week with 28. So when you think about that, it's obviously motivation isn't enough. It's how do we create that motivation? How do we create that value in the individual so they're buying and endorsing and creating what's called volition of the behaviors that we want them to do? And that's ultimately should be the goal of every leader. Now, I will also say, in case you ever hear another SEAL talk, we have a statement that basically says, we'll give our class number, and of course it was the last hard class that's ever gone through training. So I was 245, and it was the last hard class, just so everybody knows. All right, so through my time, I was studying behavioral science. And looking back, I spent years trying to figure out what makes a good leader. I looked at both the good leaders I had, and probably more importantly, I looked at the poor leaders that I had. Because obviously it's easier to learn from them than it is from the really good ones. We know what we shouldn't do, maybe not necessarily what we should do. But being able to pick up what a poor leader does allows you to grow enough to develop, you're kind of getting on the right track, and you make small course corrections from that. So here's what I learned from two behavioral scientists named Ed Deci and Rich Ryan. They created 60-something years ago a behavioral science called self-determination theory. Now, what it sought out to do didn't happen. So Ed Deci was, I think, Cornell University at the time, finishing up his PhD, and he set part of his dissertation was to validate, if I pay you more money, you'll do a better job. And I think that's kind of a gold standard within corporate America, is that assumption that we can put a little more money at that problem, at that individual, that group, and we'll get the performance that we want. Well, the reality is, as leaders, does that truly work? Not really, and it affects your P&L pretty bad, doesn't it? So as we think about this, here's what ended up happening. He gave 3 different groups a task, the same task, and said, I will pay you $10 to complete this task in 15 minutes. I'll pay you $10 to do this, and the final group, I'll pay you nothing. Well, then he left. The first group went through, everybody did it, was a non-issue. Well, then the next round was, okay, I'll pay you $10 to complete this task, but I'll be right back. To the next group, same thing. And then the third group, no pay, I'll be right back. So what he found was, the pay didn't increase the performance, it didn't increase the accuracy, and it certainly didn't increase any behaviors after the fact. And so case in point is, if I pay someone $500 to open and close the door 10 times, will you do it? Of course. Will you do it on the 11th? If there's no incentive for you? Probably not. Well, that's what we call motivation now, but the issue is that's not truly what motivation is, that's not how we engage people. So this validated some of the financial reward perspective, and I'm not saying that we should pay salespeople less, because someone will probably hang me later on that one. But the reality is, what we need to understand is that there is a level within financials, within the pay structure that we have, that no longer will motivate people. So the question is, how do we begin to understand that, and then how do we motivate it? So what we have here is the very basic principle of what self-determination theory figured out. And so I'm going to start at the bottom, and I'll work my way up. So the first one is competence. So they call it growth. It's really learning. It's how do I become better at the things that I want to do. The next one is relatedness. It's really about caring. And I don't mean the emotional sense of, I'll give you a hug every day, because I'm sure HR would not appreciate that. But it comes down to the way that you communicate with your employees, the way a good leader becomes a servant leader. It's ensuring you're taking care of them and you're taking ownership of their issues. You're removing their blockages, the constraints that are facing them, and not allowing them to accomplish the job successfully. So case in point, same deployment to Afghanistan. With everything that was going on, we have a very traditional operations cycle. So basically, I go to bed at 4 a.m., their time, get up around noon, work out, eat, or vice versa. I check into our operations center, I see what's on the plan for the day. Do we have to execute an operation? And if so, great, let's figure out what it is and let's plan. If we don't, then I'll probably just work out again and go back to bed. But if we do, we bring the unit together. We give them an initial presentation, initial brief on this is what we're expected to do tonight. And at this point, the leadership then steps aside, delegates down to the individuals that are the department or the functional leaders, saying you plan, you get the ordnance ready, you get the radios ready, and let me know if you have issues. So my role within a SEAL team was twofold. Initially, I was the communicator, what was called the JTAC, Joint Terminal Air Controller. So my job was to drop large bombs and ordnance onto designated areas, or in times of a firefight, be able to support with air assets. So for me, I didn't have time to do all the peripheral stuff. I had to get to the Air Operations Center. I had to request assets. I had to get various grids made up so we could provide the pilots with the specific data of the targets we were hitting. So because of that, my leadership made sure that my equipment was taken care of. They made sure my radios were programmed. And they made sure any other issues that I had within leadership at the Operations Center, because maybe I was the most polite person talking to them, was dealt with. So this is the part of being that servant leader. There's even the point where they'd get food for you because you have too much to do and not enough time to get it all accomplished. So as a leader, specifically within relatedness, it was them ensuring and taking care of my men and everybody else around us, making sure that the support staff had the equipment they needed, making sure that we had the intelligence we needed. So that is when I talk about relatedness, that is really what I'm talking about. It's not about the emotional state, I think, when we initially talk behavioral science that we automatically go to. It's that initial response of, oh, caring, yeah, we're not going to go down that road. But it's not about the emotion. And so the final one is autonomy. Now, I'll ask the question, if you have to give me one word to define autonomy, what is it? One word. We can do this all day. What's that? Okay, individual. What's that? Okay. What about freedom? So then let me ask you this question. If we agree that freedom and autonomy are kind of synonymous, right, the same thing, do you really have freedom in your life? Do your technicians have freedom in their lives? Do your salespeople have the freedom in their life? We don't. I know I'm coming to work every day. I know exactly what I'm going to do. I know it has to be done. So you really don't have the freedom of choice. I think that a lot of us believe that we do. And that's completely fine. So when we talk about autonomy, it's not about freedom. It's not about doing whatever you want. It's about ensuring that you're doing what you're capable of doing while staying within your lane.